Here in this beautiful valley, which was once the location of the council grounds for the strongest Indian tribes east of the Cascades, is where the United States government established Fort Walla Walla many generations ago.
Y'all ready? Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We have two announcements today. First, this might be the last time I stand at this podium as Governor of the State of Washington. And I have my first announcement, one I feel very passionate about. As you know, one of the great honors I've had for the last 12 years is that when I meet someone who's very inspirational, who has inspired me and is really representing the greater ambitions of the state of Washington, I declare them Washingtonian of the day. And I don't do this every day. I only do it when I really meet somebody who's inspirational. And when I do, I take off this pin. This is the governor's Washington Apple pin, and I pin it on them. And I just want to announce today's Washingtonian of the day is Trudy Inslee. Trudy, could you please join me?
The thunderous applause.
I've been waiting for this moment for 12 years.
Well, he did pin me in high school.
I did. That worked out pretty well. Thank you, Trudy.
You're welcome. I'm going to go over here.
I'm not going to let her give a speech. She'd like to, but
be gentle with him. This is his last one.
Thank you. Look, first I want to express pride in the state of Washington today in this announcement we're making today. I was so in love with Washington when I started this job, and I'm much more in love with her now. The qualities of the state of Washington that I have seen and experienced are so unique, and I just feel just want to beat my chest over the state of Washington. And we're going to propose a budget today that will continue the reasons for that pride. We have been successful as a state because we've always hewed to the basic values of the state of Washington. And those values are: we invest in our people, we don't leave people behind, and importantly, we don't go backwards. So I'm proposing a budget today that will embed those values in a proposed budget document for the state of Washington. And on a historical note, this budget is a situation one we really haven't seen before. In some sense we have, but in another sense it's entirely unique. In the years before I became governor, budgets required major reductions in spending and investment decisions for the state of Washington. Today our economy is not in recession. It's doing as well as ever. The state is making several years ago, the state made extraordinarily difficult budget decisions as they grappled with budget gaps in the neighborhood of $9 billion. In those years, the number continued to get worse as time went on. When I was sworn in 2013, legislators had reduced spending by $11 billion before I became governor. And they did things that leaders sometimes would do in difficult times, particularly during a recession. They froze unnecessary hiring and travel. They consolidated or eliminated some agencies or functions, and they directed agencies to reduce fuel consumption. But that didn't add up to $11 billion. So for the many folks who were not there at that time, just a historical recap. At that time, they suspended 2 voter-approved education initiatives to reduce class sizes and increase teacher pay. They took away state health care from 40,000 low-income Washingtonians. Cuts to universities and colleges were made that caused tuitions to necessarily soar. They slashed mental health care services at our state hospitals, a problem we've been trying to dig ourselves out of for 12 years now. Safety net programs for people with disabilities and elderly and those living in poverty were reduced. State employment workforce were cut by 12%, and then due to furloughs and others, there were cuts in compensation. Now we have a budget shortfall is even greater than that, as much as $16 billion over the next 4 years. And this needs to be addressed, obviously. So today we are proposing a balanced budget. I want to repeat this. We are proposing a balanced budget. And that's important for the fiscal integrity of the state of Washington. We have already taken some steps to reduce some of our expenditures, and that's the first thing we looked at when we were thinking about this proposed budget. I've already directed a freeze on non-essential hiring, contracts, and travel. My budget proposal also includes about $2 billion in reductions or delays over the next 4 years. I'll just mention some of those proposals. We would propose closing the Mission Creek Center. We're proposing closing 3 of our reentry centers in Department of Corrections. We're proposing to close 2 of our RHCs. We're proposing delaying the board bonuses for our educators. And we're proposing pausing the child care eligibility expansion that would otherwise take place. These are real cuts that were made, but we think that they were necessary given our circumstances. We have also proposed merging our Left 1 and Left 2 pension systems. This allows us to make a one-time transfer of $1 billion to our general fund while still leaving a surplus in the left system, and that's important to note. There's still a surplus in the left system. That's important to know to guarantee the security of the system for the very worthy beneficiaries. So I've proposed $2 billion in budget cuts, but anything much deeper, I believe, would go backwards. Now I want to set the tone for our budget. This budget is something I think follows Abraham Lincoln's admonition. He said, as our case is new, so must we think anew. And our case is new in the state of Washington. It is new in the sense that at a moment we have unparalleled wealth being created in our state, at a time when the economy is soaring, at a time when people have moved in about 1 million people because of our good economy, it is still a time where we have thousands of people who are ill-clad, ill-fed, and unhoused. And this is a unique circumstance. It is a change in the case of the state of Washington. And I believe in addressing this new economy, we need to think anew. And so I'm proposing some changes in our budget, including revenue increases, that will respond to this dynamic change in the economy that is producing wealth beyond human imagination. At the same time, fellow citizens literally are hungry and unhoused. And so I'm proposing to do something about that problem. So this budget thinks anew about an economy that simultaneously produces billions of wealth, but it leaves thousands so poorly off. This is a reality. It's a hard reality. There's no arguing with it, and everybody recognizes it. I think it's easy to recognize it. It's harder to do something about it. We're doing something about it today. And there's no enemies in this drama. I want to sort of repeat that. In this new, different economy, I don't believe there is evil or people who are somehow personally at fault for these circumstances. It's the nature of our technologically oriented economy, and there's no enemies in this drama. There's no bad guys in this drama. But there is a need in our state for basic fairness, for increased equity and reduction of massive poverty that we are unfortunately experiencing in this particular economy. So our first budget priority was protecting the progress we've been making in programs and services for working families and small businesses. And I want to name some of those. Public safety, education and early learning, housing, and behavioral health, where we've been rebuilding a system that has been broken for some time. We can either go back on these things and expose people to losses in these areas, or we can ask the wealthy to contribute a small amount more to our communities. And our decision to not go backwards is the basic underlying premise of our budget. We need a budget that keeps us moving forward in our state, that puts families, working families first, and that continues creating a fair tax system. And by the way, our tax system is still a bit below average on the revenue that it generates, and it needs to continue to become fair. And I may note that voters have a perception that it needs to become fair, as evidenced by their support of the capital gains tax just a few weeks ago. Fortunately, our circumstances are different than they were the last time we faced a budget shortfall. We've got a booming economy rather than a recession. And we can choose a different path for addressing increased costs due to inflation, higher caseloads, growth in popular programs like early learning and workforce costs. And all of those things have increased the costs and the ability of the state to provide these promised circumstances. We've got one of the strongest economies in the country. We've produced thousands of millionaires and billionaires. We have proposed what I would consider a fairly modest tax on incomes of extraordinary amounts. And right now we're doing this in the context that Washington still has one of the most regressive tax codes in the nation. Low-income Washingtonians, even after the adoption of the capital gains tax, pay 6 times a greater share of their income than the wealthiest amongst us. State voters made clear what they think about this a few weeks ago. So I am proposing a new wealth tax. Over 4 years under this proposal, the wealth tax would generate about $10.3 billion over 4 years. This wealth tax would put a modest 1% tax on the wealth of residents that exceeds $100 million. So this tax would only be on the excess over $100 million. It's a small number of people this would affect, just over 3,000 wealthy Washingtonians who fit in this criteria. Now, I think that this is a relative, when I say I consider this a relatively modest tax, it is one that I can fairly assure would not affect the living standards of anyone with over $100 million of assets. And I am fairly confident that their wealth will continue to grow after this tax, because any multimillionaire not getting 5% on the return, but then only paying a 1% tax, you're still going to have a lot of wealth growing in your portfolio. So it is a fairly modest proposal. We are also proposing a B&O tax change on some businesses that would raise about $2.6 billion. Again, I would suggest that's fairly modest. It's about a 10% increase. It's not a 10% rate, but it's about a 10% increase of the existing rate of these businesses. It would be on companies with annual income exceeding $1 million in certain tax categories. This is written in a way that the majority of businesses would not be impacted. There is also a temporary surcharge on larger service industries that would only last for 2 years to bridge the time to the imposition of these other taxes. Now, I'm aware that other voices will say that other revenue is not necessary to fill this budget cap, that they can gut and kneecap and blow holes in public services, and somehow Washingtonians we better. I disagree. We already have enough poverty. We have enough homelessness. We have enough people with untreated mental health care. We don't need more. What we need is a fairer tax system that will help Washington not go backwards, and that's what we're doing. And when you think about things we're talking about, they're pretty basic services. We don't want to stop our effort to expand access to mental health. It has long been underfunded. We don't want to go backwards on substance use recovery. We know we have a drug problem in our state. We don't want to go backwards on school technology and maintenance. We don't want to go backwards on child care subsidies. We don't want to go backwards on funding police. In fact, I've had a modest step forward by funding 2 additional classes of state troopers so we can get more state troopers on the road. We don't want to go backwards on transportation infrastructure or on clean energy transition. We're not going backwards in this budget. This is a starting point for legislators and others to have this discussion, and I look forward to it and look forward to your questions. Let's go around this way.
I've got 2 questions. First on the...
Tell you what, John, we've been doing this for 12 years.
One
You can have
question.
3.
Wait, my turn.
You deserve a bonus for your years of service, in my view. So you get 3 at least.
Actually, I like you because you're the only one in this room who's older than I am. Once you leave, I become the old geezer.
That's what they said when I started this job. That was 12 years ago, John, so.
I am older than 95% of the people I interact with, which means all my pop culture references are out of date. B&O tax. The thing that pops in my head are grocery stores, which have a profit margin of maybe 1 or 2%. And I'm sure there are other businesses with incredibly small profit margins within the 1, 2, 3% range. Wouldn't this increase in the B&O tax really cut into a profit margin of these low margin businesses?
A lot
Eliminate it in some cases?
a lot less than Donald Trump's 25% tariff on all our food coming in from Mexico and Canada would, where 60% of our products come in from these places, and he wants to slap a 25% tariff on it, which is a 25% increase in cost to the consumers. So if it does work in that way, it's relatively modest. And you just point out there's no tax that you can't argue, that somebody can argue there's a downside to it. Taxes are not considered happy news for anybody, anytime, anywhere. And I can tell you, as the discussion goes on the legislation, in the legislature, people will announce a very strong principle, which is don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the feller behind the tree. So yes, there's some impact somewhere on some businesses. But as I've said, I think it's quite modest and is consistent with a booming economy.
Second question is, one of the big things from the last session was shortage of police officers in the state. Your proposed budget does not have, you have the extra training centers, but it has nothing added to allow cities to hire more cops. Why is that, considering that was one of the biggest public safety issues of the last session?
Well, I would be in favor of hiring more police officers. In my last budget to the legislatures, I proposed additional funding both for the State Patrol and for local law enforcement. The legislators did not agree to that. I haven't seen a change in their attitudes at the moment. But if someone can find a way to finance additional police officers, I would be all for it in the state of Washington. I'm glad we've been able to fit 2 additional classes of state troopers in this as far as additional officers. And I would be in favor if the legislators can find a way to finance it to assist local communities in getting more officers. More power to them, but I looked at what the legislature has done in the past, and I'm trying to fit a reasonable budget that would have some reasonable chance for discussion in the legislature. And again, one note about this. This is a proposal. It's a starting point for discussion. It's hardly the last word on this subject. So I know that that'll get a good discussion.
That's it.
Thank you. Save the extra one for the next administration.
Yeah.
Let's go around here. Anybody?
Do you have a question? Sure, yeah. What were some of the challenges that you faced whenever you were crafting the proposed budget? Was there anything that gave you pause? And if you could explain.
Well, all of it, how do I say it? All of this is a challenge because you're talking about people's lives here. And when you're governor, you feel that you have 8 million souls in your hand, and you care deeply about each of them. And each one of these decisions has a real term impact on people. You know, when I'm faced a decision, let me just give you a sense of this. So I'm faced in a decision. I know that there are parents out there that can't get their 15-year-old kids into mental health treatment right now because there's not enough beds and there's not enough psychologists to treat them. And they come up and they tell me about the frustrations of they got a child who's decompensating and might be considering some self-harm, and they can't get help for that, for their child. And the pain in these people when I talk to them is profound. So do I propose a budget that will reduce their ability to get that kind of service? That's what happened the last time when there was a recession. Or do I ask and suggest that people have literally billions of dollars in their bank account to chip in a little bit more? That's the kind of decision that I had to make in this proposal. And they're not easy because no one likes to pay more taxes, but I believe it's more injurious to the state to deny that family mental health care. And those are the kind of real-term decisions we have. We're trying to make sure that basic people have food to eat in the state of Washington. The food bank, the number of people for the first time going to food banks went up 33% in the last year where we had data. 33% in 1 year. And this is hard for us to accept because we have such a booming economy. We're hiring people from all over the country and the world because they come here because of our extremely successful economy. And it's creating all kinds of wealth, and we're happy about this. And by the way, we honor and respect the people who are doing this. These people who have created these businesses are genius entrepreneurs, and we respect that. But that kind of decision is the one we face in a real term. Those are hard. And I know some people aren't going to like this budget because it asks for them to contribute a little bit more, many of whom are great philanthropists. But you can't run a state on philanthropy. 85% of all the food bank doesn't come from philanthropy. It comes from the state of Washington and the federal government. And one of our problems is the federal government has the money for the nutritional program is being cut from the federal government. We don't want to see more hungry people. So those are all hard decisions, but I am confident we're making the right ones. And again, because I think how I think about it is, what are the values of the state of Washington? We take care of our people, we don't go backwards, and we're confident in our future. And I think this is a budget that fulfills that.
Quick follow-up on that. So you're talking about the potential new tax upon wealthy individuals. Are you worried at all about such a tax being potentially driving people out of the state, innovators and leaders? I asked the same of Director Sullivan earlier, but wanted to put the question to you.
You know, you can't predict human behavior, and maybe there is someone who make that decision. I can't say unilaterally no one will ever make that decision. But I'm very confident we will become the best place to do business, or one of the best in the state of Washington. That will remain. I may note that our state has simultaneously been listed as the best place to do business and the best place to work by, I think it was Wallet Hub or one of the other rating agencies. I'm confident that we will continue to be a tremendous place to do business. And again, the tax burden, all taken together, is not relatively high compared to other states. It was below average as a unit of GDP. So this does not put us in the top tier of tax states. So if you look at, because we have the lowest income tax in the United States, which is 0. And people look at that as well. So if you look at the whole structure of how we finance the state, I don't believe that's going to reduce our economic growth in the state of Washington.
Governor, two unrelated questions. The first, I noticed that there was no funding to expand the encampment right-of-way program in your budget. Can you talk about that decision and where that kind of leaves the program? And then secondly, on the wealth tax, the proposal that you have seems to affect slightly more people with slightly more wealth, if you will, than the one that legislators have kind of been pushing in the last few years. Can you explain that decision and how you anticipate legislators kind of taking that on come January?
Yeah, well, first off, just a note on the right-of-way initiative. I think it's been very, very successful, and I want to point this out. A year and a half, 2 years ago, when you drove from Olympia to Everett, you saw 46 very significant homelessness encampments. Because of those investments, those folks have now been offered shelter, and those encampments are gone. You can drive from Olympia to Everett, and there's no really large encampments. That is a huge improvement in the state of Washington. So thank the citizens and the legislature for following us on that proposal. And by the way, about 70% of those people, I believe, are still in shelter now. So it's been quite successful. This is just an issue of what fits into the box. We had a certain box, and I think we've made substantial progress on that. We'll continue to make progress, but it's what we could afford. That's the basic answer to that question. And thanks for the people that have worked so hard on this project. As far as the amount of the wealth tax, I guess what I'd point out is that in the last several months, our projections have been much more dire. We've had probably an increase just in the caseload projection of around $250 million just in that one caseload production. Our revenues have gone down as well as far as projected revenues. So there's been some changes since the last time the legislature had this discussion. And I think legislators, it's going to be a challenging session. Many or most of them have not had an opportunity to study the budget yet, as I have had, because I've surrounded by dozens of brilliant people who can put these pieces together. They have not had that. So my budget is to help them start. This is the starting discussion, and I hope it helps them.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about the reductions and the delays, because you're talking a lot about the wealth tax closing, the bulk of this expected gap, but the reductions and delays you mentioned will go toward educators with national board certification and also pausing ECAP expansion. Can you talk a little bit more just about how you were thinking about approaching those reductions and delays, especially after this election, a huge message was no cuts to childcare, no cuts to education, and yet here we are. So can you just talk a little bit about the thinking behind making those decisions and how you're approaching that?
So I'm going to give you a thematic answer to that. What I've said is we're not going backwards. I don't believe we should go backwards. I don't think this budget does go backwards. It doesn't go forward as fast as we'd like because it pauses some of those otherwise proposed increases in eligibility for child care, for instance. So there was a proposed increase in eligibility, and we're pausing that step forward. We're not going backwards, though. That's how I looked at sort of the cleavage on these issues.
And when it comes to the health tax, or the wealth tax,
Yeah, good point.
the wealth tax, yes.
Get that report correct, okay?
Yeah. One of the issues with the capital gains tax is just its volatility. It didn't bring as much revenue as expected. How does your wealth tax proposal protect against possible, lower than expectations revenue generated by that proposal?
Well, our Department of Revenue has evaluated this, and this was important. They believe it is, an effective proposal that can actually raise dollars in real terms that is somewhat predictable. And that was important in our assessment. So we think this is a substantively valid proposal. And when you think about it, a wealth tax is likely to be less volatile than a capital gains tax because it's about the long-term holdings of people, which don't fluctuate as much as a decision to sell taxes maybe this year and then not, or sell stocks this year and then you don't sell them for 2 years, then you sell them again. So it's likely to be more stable than a capital gains tax, more predictable. So I would give it high marks in that regard. Let me notice something too. This is a new idea. It hasn't been effectuated in the state of Washington or in many other states. But again, I come back to this situation. This is an entirely new economy that we have that I believe the state and the nation has to respond to this inequity beyond human imagination. We cannot survive as a healthy, robust community that believes we're treated fairly while we have this level of poverty and want amidst this enormous wealth. There has to be some mechanism so that working people have a way to survive in an economy that generates this much wealth. I have proposed one way to do that. There may be other ways. But in some fashion, we need to bring more equity to our society. I believe that's absolutely required by any common sense of fairness. And again, this is not meant to be punitive to the people who have done fantastic work while they're generating this wealth. I respect these people. They're deserving of respect. They're not deserving of ridicule. But the community is deserving of a fair tax system that will not have massive homelessness and hunger and single parents who can't afford their kids' food. And that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Time for one more question.
Governor, I'm curious if in your budget discussions, a ask from the North Sound for state support to start up a rescue tug in the San Juan Islands came to your attention, and if it did, how you assessed that.
I do believe that we need to move forward with a rescue tug in the Straits. And we are talking to our Canadian friends about a way to accomplish that.
Separate from the Nia Bay one that already exists.
Yes, this would be separate in the Herald Straits. And we think the best place to put that in port is on the Canadian side. It just logistically works best. And so we're talking to our friends in British Columbia and the federal government in an effort to move forward plans to do that. It was too preliminary to put something specific in the budget, but we hope that we can go in that direction. The risk, because of the expansion, the huge expansion of traffic there, really justifies a rescue tug. And they have, in my book, proved their efficacy. So I hope that we can make progress on that. I'm happy to take another one or two. It's the last shot. Yeah. I'm good. Not Jamie. Just one.
Education, special education's been an area of interest and concern and expense, and the superintendent sought a lot of money in his request to you for to increase special education funding. I did not see an increase there. Can you walk through why this budget doesn't increase funding for special education?
Well, I'm pleased that we did increase the special ed funding by raising the cap in the last session. It's just a matter of dollars and cents. If people can do more, obviously I'd be very grateful and happy if they could find a way to finance it. It's just a matter of how much we thought was tenable moving forward for the state of Washington. Again, we're not going backwards. And that's the most important concept that I'm trying to drive home here. We may not be going as forward as fast as I would have liked, but we're not going backwards. And that's a realistic proposal.
And on that point,
Yeah.
because it seems to be the message that you're sending to the next administration, next legislature. Obviously in 12 years, you arrived vowing not to raise taxes. Here as you leave, you are. And it's not in economic trouble as it was before. So you've set the field for them. Talk about your conversations with the incoming governor about the budget, and how much of this did you share? How much of what you were trying to do and deliver with this proposal as he thinks about his?
Well, he is an independent person of tremendous talent and experience, and I respect that. So I've proposed a budget that's, I hope, going to promote discussion. I don't know at this moment what he is going to propose. He has said that before he even thinks about revenue, he's going to scrub the budget for efficiencies, and I'm sure he will do that. We've done that as well. We've come up with $2 billion in cuts. Beyond that, we think it would be injurious to our state. What he does, he's going to make a decision, and I think we're in good hands. But I have not tried to, put our budgets on the same track. He's going to make an independent decision. He's got elected independently, and he'll use his wisdom and experience for making a proposal.
But did you explain the wealth tax proposal and share with his team, your tax proposals you were.
We shared, I've not talked to Bob personally about it, but our staff, their staff was advised in general what we were going to propose. Okay, with that, thank you very much. And I just want to tell you I've enjoyed working with you all, and I wish you well. Again, I want to part telling you how important you are. Without you, democracy is in big trouble, and it is my hope that you will prosper. I feel so strongly about the importance of the work you do. And I just want to tell you, I really hope that you continue and your successors continue too. We need you big time. So I leave by protecting democracy. Thanks a lot. Good luck.